All
All
right.
right, we're recording and we got both kinds of recording going.
We're live. We've got a
Great.
recording.
Okay. So the first time I did the divining was like when I was 14, and my girlfriend's boyfriend's friend. So it was a blind date. We went to a movie. And after the movie, we came to my parents' house and we sat around and had tea. And we talked about what was in the movie. And in the movie, the main character went to a prophet. And so we were talking about that. And I had just talked to one of my brother's girlfriends at the time, who was from a gypsy family, and she showed me how to read tea leaves. So I said, hey, why don't I try reading tea leaves? So that's what I did. And I went around the room. And the last one was this guy, Ralph, who was this blind date. And I didn't really know anything about him. And I looked at the tea leaves. I had been told a couple of conventional signs, in terms of how to, how to set it up and so on and so on. And I looked at it and I saw that his brother would either be seriously injured or die in a motorcycle accident.
Mm.
And that was a big surprise. And everybody thought, oh, yeah, right, sure. And the guy says, well, yeah, he has a brother, and the brother does ride a motorcycle. But, that was, we just went on. I mean, nobody was taking it very seriously. He came up to me a couple of weeks later in the school, it was high school or junior high, I don't remember, and said that it had come true, that his brother had died in a motorcycle accident, and that it was my fault. I had cursed him
No,
by
no.
doing this, and as his parents had explained to him, doing divining was an abomination. It was unclean. It was against the Bible, and that it was a curse. Well, that was kind of off-putting, and
Traumatic for a 14-year-old? I mean,
exactly. And so that kind of scared me, and maybe I shouldn't do it. And so I didn't do it for a while. But then when I was in my 20s, I began doing it at parties.
mhm.
And people still read tea, people still drunk tea with loose tea leaves. And so I would do this at parties. And what really struck me at the time was that the people that I did the best with were people that I didn't know.
Uh,
I was not inhibited towards them, and I could just say whatever. And the other thing that really struck me was how different people's brains are. Because, like, in one person, it would be all cartoony, another person, it was just totally different. And and I clearly got some hits. I remember the one I mean, that was a really long time ago, that really struck with me was somebody, and I said, oh, you're sitting in an office and I see a lot of elephants, and then you get this bad news. And they said, yeah, actually they were looking at a magazine, elephants in the magazine, and that they were there for a sexually transmitted disease, and they had it. And so that was the bad news. And that kind of stuck in my mind because elephants.
yeah.
But apparently they really were interested in elephants, and this magazine had elephants, and that had an emotional impact on them.
Mhm.
So then I was kind of doing it for people, like I say, at parties and friends, and then when people no longer drank tea with with loose tea leaves, I transferred it to crumpled cellophane from cigarette packs. That was easy because everybody smoked then, that was the thing, everybody smoked, and that was readily available. And then when I figured out, if I can do it from cellophane, I mean, there's nothing traditional about cellophane. I was just using it as a way of kind of seeing a random shape that I could then see images in. I thought, well, why don't I just try to do it without anything? I'll just do it in my head. And I could do that. That was actually easier than the crumpled cellophane.
Oh, I still want to know how you decided that as your oracle. Were you just like all around smoking someday? And
Well, I needed something to see the image, like a crystal ball kind of a thing. You know,
oh,
I
yeah,
needed something to see reflections, images in. And so that was readily available. And it was almost actually, my memory of it is that it was sort of a joke. It was like, oh, yeah, sure. You can see it in crumpled cellophane. Sure. I mean, give me a break. I mean, that's ridiculous, you know? And so I it was sort of a challenge. But then knowing that I could do that then liberated me to just do it in my head. So I did it in my head. And I'm going to talk today about doing it that way. That is doing it in your head. But that's not the normal way. The normal way is that people use a tool, cards or something like that. And we'll, like I say, in the next podcast, we'll talk about how to use different tools and and how it's different from one tool to another tool and the relationship between that and the supernatural.
Great.
Then the way I do it is I see into people. And last time, which we apparently only have on YouTube,
yes,
I learned how to turn it off. And so the way to turn it off was to, first of all, not look for shadows or feelings when I see people. And if I do see shadows, colors, not to try to see underneath that, not to try to interpret it. Now, when I do the divining, it's easy. I mean, at first, when I did it, I had to find a way of emptying myself, of throwing myself away, so to speak. And I talked about that in a previous podcast, how you do that when you're doing the trances and so on. You need to, and the shaman death, rebirth, you need to know a way to transcend the ego, to turn that off, so that what's going on in your head is empty. You can listening under people's words. They'll go blah, 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 blah. And I'm no longer hearing what they're saying. I'm hearing something underneath that then leads me to the images and so on that I see. I generally, when I do the divining, I ask if there's something in particular that they want me to look for. Because that then allows me to focus it. And then I ask them to talk about their situation. I listen under their words, go into a trance, and then I look for extra shadows or colors. And then it's like I'm flipping up options when I do it. I'm seeing from there, okay, they want me to look at if there's any problems that they might run into. So then I look for problems, in it. I focus those templates, so to speak, by whatever it is the issue that they're wanting me to look for. And then when I start to see something that takes a shape, I then interrupt them, and then I let the true speaker talk, interpreting what I see. And like I say, I've talked about the true speaker in previous podcasts. And it's difficult. It tends to get difficult to talk. I don't always remember what I say. And oftentimes, I mean, it happens almost very often, that the client knows what I'm talking about, even though I don't. And I was thinking, I've given a couple of examples of that in previous podcasts, but one that was, I think, the most striking example of that is when I was talking to somebody, and they actually, it started, they were across the room, and they saw me looking at them in a weird way. I was still in a trance. It was after a trance session. And they saw me looking at them and they say, "Oh, what did you see?" I say, "Oh, you are guilty.
Mm.
You did it." And they were very surprised and they said, "How
I'm
did
guessing
you
this
know?"
wasn't the sweat lodge trance we just, or the
No,
purification goddess.
this
I
is
don't want
something
to.
else. This was really, really shocking. And so I'm not giving away any details when I say this,
Yeah.
because where it was or who it was or anything like that. But, they said, "Oh, they said, oh, they came across the room at me. I mean, they had come across the room and I'd said this to them and they said, "Oh, how did I know? This was completely secret. They didn't want anybody to hear this or to find out about this." And it turned out they were a psychiatrist who had seen, who had a client, a 19-year-old client came into them. They had seduced their client. They were lesbian. This was a woman. They had seduced this 19-year-old. And after they had sex in a lesbian way, the client was so upset by having done this lesbian act that they committed suicide. So this woman had then felt extremely bad and felt like she had to atone for it. So she joined a cult, which was, among other things, intentionally celibate. They weren't allowed to have any relationships outside the cult, and it was policed, so to speak. I mean, they took this
like a horrible cult.
I mean, exactly, but this was her atonement.
Okay.
And so she was allowed to go to work and come home, and nothing outside that. Everything else was within the cult. There was no sex, no other relationships. And this was her atonement for this terrible thing that she had done. Now, I had no idea when I said, "You're guilty," what she was guilty of.
But that guilt was in her field. Like I find when I'm reading people, the easiest stuff to pull out is the stuff that's just like in their field, and that had to have been and just
exactly.
like in her mind.
Field. Exactly. And it was so in her field because she was forcing herself. She had been like, I can't remember, it was a long time, like 10 years or more in this cult, where every day she went to work, she came home from work, she was policed. She had to go, and it was like whipping herself, it was like, this was my guilt. This is what I do to atone, And so now my advantage of my approach to prophecy is that my prophecies tend to be very specific.
Yeah.
And it's not kind of general, you'll meet a tall, dark stranger, nothing like that. It's like, okay, you'll meet a guy named Pete and he'll be outside a grocery store. And it tends to be very specific. That's an advantage. And another advantage is that I can do it anytime, any place, as long as I am able to get into trance. I can't always get into the trance, depending upon the situation. But if I can get into the trance, then I can do it. But there are problems with this approach. One of them is that it's much more difficult to interpret what I see because I'm not using a code. Okay. So if somebody's reading the cards, and they see the hangman, they know what that does, what that means, and there's no ambiguity about it.
Right.
It's in the code. But when I see something, I haven't got a code. So I kind of making it up. I mean, I got to channel the true speaker. That isn't always pure. Occasionally, it's ambiguous. I can't, it's difficult to read the code. Furthermore, I have complete responsibility for what I say. It isn't, I can't say, well, I don't know, it says it in the cards. Well, it's not my problem. It's your problem. And I don't have any code to back me up. And also, delivering bad news is difficult.
It is. You never want to do that, but sometimes you gotta.
you got it, and it's hard. And for example, I remember after, this sticks in my head because I found it was really unfair, these people to judge me for this. But it was after a trance session, and these people came to the trance, and I can't remember now what posture we were doing, but there were like these three people who were, I mean, it might have even been four people, three that were going to go on a trip, and the husband of one of them. And the three people who were going to go on a trip, these ladies, they had come to the trance because they wanted to hear about the trip. So of course, that's what they saw. And each one of them saw something horrible. One of them it was a boat, and they fell out of the boat, and then they got tangled in the anchor rope or chain or something. And I mean, they just, all of it was all bad news, bad news, bad news. So afterwards, they said, so, I mean, how do you interpret this? What would you say about this? And I said, I looked and I said, well, it's very clear. You got to be really careful on this trip because there's a lot of bad news, you know.
Yeah.
And they said, and I said, you know, it feels to me like it's really dangerous, and that you shouldn't do whitewater rafting.
No, I would never do that.
Oh, why not? That's why we want to go. They're going to Puerto Rico or someplace like that. And the whole idea was to do this whitewater rafting, and, you know, and I said, well, you know, and then I gave them certain instructions, you know, well, don't do it if you're late, if you're going to be late. And I gave them, I can't remember, a couple of other things to, you know, you have to be very careful. And I gave them, I think, 3 different, you know, it's like the accidents, right? I said, well, if this and this and this, don't do it. So they came back, and the trip was fine, but they didn't do the whitewater rafting because of the accidents came
Not
true.
worth it. Yeah, not worth it. 3 people having a vision, not worth it.
But they said they were really mad at me because they said this had ruined their trip and it was my fault.
So you have a cycle of people only wanting good, which is why like psychics who do prophecy on on like the networks and stuff, they're just telling, a lot of them, not always, because I've done it before to make money, but they're usually not from the truth sayer. They're just telling people what they want to hear, and people want to know that, like just like most people want a spiritual leader that tells them what to do and that they're dirty sinners. Like people want to call an intuitive or get prophecy. It's going to be a great vacation.
I mean, what do you do about bad news?
Well, I mean, same. I definitely, I don't see, the only thing that's coming up, because most of it's not bad. So I had a client today who really wants to find her true love. And, she was hoping that this guy is the one. So, I tend to see the good and the bad in most situations. There's very rarely, I haven't had any, like if you have a tragedy coming up, usually it's confirmation, like, I was at the Salt Cave, I'm like, oh, wow, you've got a sickness right there. Yes, I have cancer. You're right. I have cancer right there. But I haven't had to deliver any bad news really that they didn't already know. It's more confirmation, except for I did see someone's dog was going to die. And but it ended up being a blessing because then they could spend more time with the dog that they wouldn't have known. So I don't have that same dharmic story with prophecy. When it's all good, I'm like, oh, trust me, I tell you the truth. So this is all good news, and I'm not just tooting your horn. Like, this is good news. If it is something like you're not going to get the house, or yes, you're going to break up, I like to channel what the lesson was with it and to kind of smooth it over. But
yeah,
I've only been doing it almost 10 years. You've been doing it longer. Maybe it'll change, but right now it's kind of like, no, you're not going to get the job, or no, you're not going to move. And there's this and this and this and this too. So we talked about the first one, which you can find on YouTube, that there's those different paths. It sounds like when you're reading, it's like, and I know I've had this experience with you. I was so excited with your prophecy, not you, but the prophecy of, you know, being with the Netflix opportunity to record in the show, but it was last Halloween, and you know, you saw that if I went, I could get a possession, which
that's right,
because my family's so sensitive. And I've seen my mom get a possession by an ancestor who is a scientist and didn't believe in it. Afterwards, she goes, why? I'm not going to anything else with you. Like, there's no way she could do a trance. She is just too open, right? And you said, like, you're real open, Dawn, and this could happen. And I remember being sad and disappointed and getting resistance from the other women, like, no, you can do it. And I'm like, I don't know how to explain this to you. Like, Susan's pretty accurate, and it's not worth the risk.
You know? Well, and that's the thing. It's like, and if you had like I say, if I was using a tool, I wouldn't be responsible. Right. Says in the cards. I mean, you know, what can I do? Look, see, here's the card.
This cellophane has a picture of the,
Exactly. I mean, that was the problem with cellophane, right? You couldn't.
People are looking at you. They're like, you did this. Whereas the card, you can be like, oh, the card's said it.
Exactly. And so, and of course, you know, I've been doing it now. Let me see, I'm 75. So that's a long time.
From 14, yeah.
14, that's a long time.
So for the psychics, that gives me a real quick question to ask you. So for the intuitives and the people that are wanting to do divination for themselves and for other people, it changes then. It sounds like throughout I mean, for you, it's changed. I think it's changed for me too, because I started out with cards. I like to use both. I like to do as many tools to make it easy on myself as possible, honestly.
Right.
But it changed, like how you do it and why you do it. It's just like all of life, it evolves, right?
It evolves. That's right. And as you open aspects of yourself, then you're needing a different tool, you know. And people and we'll talk a lot next time about different tools, because there's a lot to say about that, about your relationship to the tool and so on. We'll talk about that next time. But yeah, exactly. You're absolutely right. It evolves. And certainly for me, it has evolved so that it's become very easy. I mean, easier and easier to do it. And so that means I have to be more careful not to do it.
To do it in appropriate, not to just go into trance like you did I see you did it, you're guilty.
I'm not sure. Exactly. I'm not sure I would do this now. You know what I mean? I think I would probably be la la la. Okay, that lady has got a lot of shadows, but what do I care?
She's not coming to me. Yeah.
You know, but and I think also you as you mature, and again, this is something we'll talk about, and the spirit world opens, you see more, and you get more people asking. You know, there's a more of a connection there. There's more of a, and there. I know when I first started doing this, I had, and again, that's one of the problems of doing it. My approach is that it's scary to do a prophecy because I don't know. I mean, is this right? It's weird.
Trusting. There is a confidence.
Exactly.
That builds. I mean, you don't want to give the wrong. I mean, still, even doing it as a career for a while now, you know, I had a client yesterday who wanted to talk in the spirit realm to her recently deceased husband. And it's just like, I was seeing things. Oh my gosh, this is a great story. So I was seeing, he came right in and he said, tell her about the anniversary on the 20th. I mean, specific, right? And I went, what happened? They were together 35 years. I said, what happened on your 20th anniversary? She goes, well, nothing. I don't remember. Well, later in the reading, he poked me and he goes, I said for her confirmation, the 20th anniversary. And so I said, I'm sorry, he's back and he wants to talk about, I know you can't remember. And she goes, well, our anniversary is on the 20th of the month. I was like, okay, there you go, you know. But for a while, oh my gosh, I still get that, like, am I getting it wrong? Not, as you said, it's like any practice, you know, you get more confident the more you do it. So I'm pretty confident and I can turn it on and off because I do it more for a job. I turn it off. And if people ask, I'm like, here's my hours because I've got to, you know, but that switching from the different parts of the brain, I'd be curious about your experience.
Well, and that's part of what we'll talk about now is the different parts of the brain.
Perfect. Segue.
I mean, but it's, yeah, that fear never goes away, but you know, you trust yourself more. Yes. And I tend to say to people, well, yeah, I'm just going to tell you what I see and I'm not going to censor it, you know, kind of, you know, like it ain't me, you know.
I say I won't remember it. It's just channeling, and I can feel when it's channeling through. There's like trickles, and then when it's going, and like you said, different people are easier than others. The people that are really willing and open and want to know, it just, I can just channel the truth speaker. But some people who are real, like, I'm not sure, I don't trust this, or I'm afraid of it. It's like, I'm pulling
exactly. So first, the way to start is by, like I say, listening under people's words, looking for color and shadow and chakras. Okay, so I'm going to try holding this up. Can people see this? Let's see. I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, we can see the top half. So maybe let them take that in. We got the negative emotions, positive emotions, colors, and the chakras.
So, I'm not going to be able to hold it while I talk. So but this is from Patanjali. So this is the Yoga Sutras, like maybe 4,000 years ago. And he says, well, if you want to read people, you gotta look for the color of their blood. And that turns out to be really good advice, not a surprise. I mean, like I say, if anybody listening, if they do yoga, I mean, that's yoga. I mean, that's what that comes from him mostly. I mean, it's ancient practices that he then wrote down and talks about and develop. And the approach, and now what I'm going to talk about then is his idea about looking for the color of people's blood. And then as that got articulated more in the rasa theory, and so, which is also an ancient Indian theory that we had a podcast about, but I revealed secrets and it got trashed. And so spirits didn't like it. Maybe someday we'll do it again, but you know, but so the chakras then are these energy centers, and people can look that up if they're interested in more detail about that. Different traditions have different numbers, but on the very top, that is the one outside the body. So on the very top of your head, that's white. That's union with the all. And so sometimes people are shining, you know, they shine on the top. And that's about...
These are the people that aren't raising teenagers. I can't wait to shine from the top again. I know I've shined up there, but it's really, I want to meet the master who is still shining with a
with teenagers. That's exactly it. And so, you know, and so in this, the idea is that there are certain emotions that you can read that are the positive emotions that people are having. And then there are negative emotions. And then there are sort of things that are blocking that way of being, you know. So if somebody has shadows up there, shadows are the blockages. Shadows are negative emotions, you know, and you look at it, and then if you allow yourself in trance to kind of allow those shadows kind of to look into those shadows. Now, in ordinary reality, of course, you know, light and shadow, it's got to do where the light is and where the shadows are. So you're looking for ways in which it's not the shadows of the room. It's not the
Right.
light in the room.
It's like a dense, when I'm looking at this, as you say
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
using my psychic eye,
Okay.
it's almost like a dense spot, like a cluster. It's
Yes.
very dark and heavy and it's dense.
That's exactly right. So it doesn't look quite like ordinary shadow. It's got more substance to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're looking at that, and then it takes a shape, and you can feel then this emotional tone from it. And the colors then give you that, like he says, you look at somebody, and if you see like a color, it again, it, as you say, it's more dense than ordinary colors, their outfit, their skin tones, and so on. It's something more dense than that. Okay, this is what's dominating you. And like, for example, out the top of the head, and we'll talk about this more later, there are situations where people, like I said, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but people have forced their spirit out.
Mm-hmm.
And like when you, for example, when we first talked about how you were doing your divining, you were doing it by going out the top of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And that turns out to have a lot of risks.
Yeah.
But I could see it because I could see this white out out the top. And I could see that you weren't completely in your body,
Yeah.
you know. And so that's a way of reading somebody, and then you look into it, and then you can see, okay, why is this, why you can feel the emotional tone of it.
I
The
got to
third
tell
eye.
you that the testimony to trance too. Last year, one of the trances, Spirit came in and taught me because it's a natural thing I do, anyways. But they came in and taught me how to bring it back down each time, and I thought that was so cool. It was like a whole 15-minute trance where they said, "Let me show you how you're going to recover when that happens."
Yeah, that's right, and that's really important to know, because sometimes people do that, and that's the wrong way to do divining,
Right.
because it makes you sick.
And I know people, I've told you, I've known psychics and mediums and divination people who do it that have been sick, that have gotten cancer. And that's because the spirit, or why is that? Why does that make people sick?
Because they're they're doing it when they're letting it out the top, their body it collapses,
Mm.
and that allows dark energies to collect in your body.
Wow.
And because it's a vacuum, so to speak, and so this darkness comes in, and usually people who do that are doing it because and I think that was true in your case too, as you said in the podcast that is only as a YouTube video. Because you were doing it out of fear. You were escaping yourself out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so fear, doubt, you know, pushes somebody out the top.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Ungrounded. I mean, I've met people who are just so ungrounded. They're just not.
exactly ungrounded, unbalanced. I
Yeah.
remember for me, I had a time period in my life where I was doing that, and I could feel it, because I started to get like this constant like sore throats and a lot of snot, and I was kind of starting to feel like a weakness,
Yeah.
because I was doing it through pushing it out, pushing the energies out the top. And I had to allow spirit, so to speak, like you talk, spirit. I had to allow that. I had to remember, so to speak. And for me, it's remembering, okay, you're going out the top. You can do that. And I could like people, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, people who do astral projection.
Mm-hmm.
You go out the top, and then you get disoriented. How do I get back in?
Yeah.
And so you can, it's got a lot of problems. There are a lot of problems with doing that. I advise people, if you're doing it that way, don't.
Just don't do it. It's not worth it.
Don't do it that way. That isn't a good way to do it.
Right?
You pull it down. Do it from other places in your body. But then, the third eye, that's where the natural place to do it from is from right that place, right the third eye place. And that's yellow. And if you're seeing somebody with an aura, right? Some people read auras. Those are the colors. You read an aura color. If you read the yellow as that color, that's the third eye. And they're then focusing the big picture,
Ooh.
and that's calm. But that's then, if you see the shadows through in there, that's delusion. They're like conspiracy theories,
False
like
beliefs, yes.
false beliefs.
People are always saying during their sessions with me, I feel like blah, blah, blah. I said, no, that's a belief system. And that ain't, you can believe that all you want, but that doesn't make a reality.
Exactly. And that blocks that. And so they're walking blind because they can't see the future. They can't see what's going to happen next. All of us see it a little bit. We talked about that last time.
That's
all
right.
of us see it a little bit. And you need to help yourself see it by keeping that open, and you keep that open by not allowing those delusions.
Which would mean
beliefs.
not have all or nothing thinking too, right? Like try to be more less it's always this way, or what's good for me is good for you. And I try to teach people it's like,
absolutely,
it's not good for you. And that, I think that that makes accuracy and divination more accurate. If you have a belief system, especially the conspiracy theories and stuff, then you can't do the truth sayer voice.
That's right. You can't do it for others or yourself.
No.
You can't do it. So in that sense, the conspiracy theories are kind of true for you because they're all oftentimes very paranoid. And everybody's after me because you close yourself in. They're closing themselves in.
That fear, yeah.
The throat is blue. So if somebody has a blue aura, maybe that's the right way to talk about these colors. The blue aura, that's got to do with knowledge, speech, humor, joy. And the shadow then is anger. And that's also blocked by lies they're telling themselves. And that tends to be not like delusions, not stuff from the outside that they're believing or them holding their beliefs too firmly.
Too judgmental.
That's it. Judgmental. And it's their lies they tell themselves about the world and about themselves and about who they are, and oftentimes you'll see, like, for example, maybe I shouldn't use this example, but apparently I am. the former president, and you can see he's going like this all the time. He's going like this, and when the lighting isn't, when you read him without the natural, you have to subtract the natural light. You can see all this darkness here. Because this guy has got a real problem with lies about himself, and he's forcing himself to see these lies, and that's blocking him right through the throat. Wow. So he has no access to the rest of his body. He's all doing it right from here.
I can see that now that you said that. Yep.
Yeah, and that's what then when you see somebody who's doing that, like this, and you're looking, okay, now is this shining, or is it just because they're trying to do true speaking, so to speak? That's one way of doing the true speaking. Are they doing that, or is it because they've got this big collar, darkness, lies, and blue then is the color of that, and heart is red, and that's of course the chest, the central chest, and love, faith, devotion, duty, and that's then when that's shadowed, when you see shadows, that tends to be grief, sorrow, and and sometimes you see them, they're really collapsed there because they're afraid of loss, afraid, false sense of self, that's blocking their empathy, their joy, and the hara, that's that area, maybe about an inch, something like that, below the belly button. That tends to be green. So if their aura is green, it's got to be, and the hara is, that's really important, because when you're centered, that's where you live. You live in the hara, because it's be here now, it's courage, it's action, it's power. And when somebody asks you to breathe deeply, you fill up your chest and then you let that go down into the hara, just to let yourself rest there. And so when you're seeing that, if it's bright, it's courage, but if it's shadowed, it's fear. And if it's blocked, it's blocked by shame, guilt, depression, hopelessness. Those are the kinds of things that prevent people from living, from accessing that piece of themselves. And so part of the idea is to look at where people are in their bodies. You can see that from how they're holding themselves. And then you can see that by the extra shadows. And then you're looking for the color of their blood, so to speak. You can look into them, or through their aura, you can then access that negatives, positives, blockage through the colors, through the darkness, through the light, through those places in them. The bottom chakra, that's like dark brown or black, and that's because there are two chakras there that are combined. And there, it's about sex, family, security, life and death. And there, it's fear and disgust, that's shadowing.
The root chakra you're talking
That's
about?
the root chakra. That's right.
And the natural color is supposed to be brown?
Well, it depends upon. It's not really any color.
Oh, okay. Well, brown would make sense because that's earth, right? We're animals.
Right. It's earth. Exactly. It's an earth. So they might be grounded in the earth, and that's the brown. Or it might be the blackness is really an emptiness, just like the top isn't really white. It's like it's empty. It's the empty nothing. But it's bright. It's shining. It's the shining nothing. And at the bottom, it's the shine. It's the opposite. It's the deep, deep, deep darkness. That darkness that is beyond color.
Yeah. And the roots, like I am connected to earth, whereas in the animal body, the animal self, whereas this is more like that whole, because we know we are all one, even though we're separated for this incarnation, but this is like the vastness.
That's right. It's the Atman. It's the supreme Atman. It's the consciousness that transcends. And so when I look at the ant, I'm seeing that in them. You see it everywhere. If you know how to look, you can see it. So basically, there are these two ways to think. There's the left brain, which is, and I'm now talking crudely. The brain is more complicated than this, but just to talk crudely, there's the left brain, which is analytical, symbolic, linear, reason. It's rooted in words. It controls the right side of the body, the right hand. Science is left brain, and I remember when my PhD is in philosophy, and the philosophy department that I went to, OSU, analytic philosophy, they're all into language. And I remember having these arguments often with these guys. And they were saying, oh, all thought is language. And I'm saying, no, man, I know that's not true, man. I think in pictures. No, that's not possible. So, right, whatever. Like we talked before, so sure. Okay, right, that's right. You say that. That's what you think.
Anything is one thing. I gotta doubt that. I'm like, really? Because we live in a world of polarity, and all or nothing thinking doesn't really belong there.
I know, but they were always very closed on that. They had a stake in that. I thought that was amusing. But the whole culture has a stake in that. So, for example, I don't think they do this anymore in school, but when I was, that was a really long time ago, when I first learned to write 70 years ago, I'm very left-handed, and they insisted I write with my right hand. I couldn't write with my right hand. I
Wow.
can only write with my left hand, and this was, no, you got to do your right hand. Right hand. I couldn't do right. You know, it's something, and it's the idea that we should be linear, language, reason, right? That's an obsession of this culture. I
Yes.
have the I have the advantage in that sense that I learned philosophy. I forced myself consciously, I forced myself to learn how to think with my left brain. I'm very right brained, and my thinking is still mostly visual, but I can do the left brain thing. But what I know from that, the reason I bring it up is that you can train yourself. And so I trained myself to be able to be analytic, symbolic, linear, reason rooted in words. I learned to do that. I'm not great. I'm good at reason, but I'm not great at numbers, like that. But right brain is intuition, visual thinking, art, synthesis, and that controls the left side of the body, the left hand. That's where the shaman skills are. That's where the divining skills are, at least the way I do it. And we'll talk later other ways to do it that might engage the other hemisphere. But this is how I do it. And this is most of the ways engage in that. And I'm sure that's the way you do it. You see images, you have feelings, well, I'm catching this, it's not like words. It's not words. And so the thing to learn to do the divining is to strengthen your right brain. That is, strengthen your intuition, your visual thinking. I'm an artist. I'm left-handed. I mean, that's easy for me, but for other people, it's not so easy, and you can learn to do it. And so the first step in learning to do that is to open to noticing synchronicities, unusual events. And we talked about that in a previous podcast. You open yourself up to seeing the weird things, allowing yourself to see weird things. Because as I've told in these examples, and one of the reasons I used the example of this poor lady who had to belong to a cult, I mean, you don't expect that of people. I mean, that is just not, that's, you gotta open yourself up to allow to see weird things. People are weird.
Yeah, you stay curious. It's almost like kids, we're born naturally curious, and then like you were trying to be conditioned out of your intuition and get that analytical part. That's also part of the society, is to condition us to put judgments on things.
That's right. Put judgments on things, and that closes us up so that we can't see everything. So we're not able to actually see the weird things that come up when you do divining, because everybody is different. I mean, everybody is different.
And being open, I will tell you that I've learned so much from divination, because I do stay curious. So new weird things can drop in. I'm like, whoa, I didn't even know that was a thing, man. That's so cool. Like, like the biggest thing that comes through is like, my grandmother taught me, she passed in 2011, but she came back and she said, hey, I can help heal the ancestral line, but you need me as a telephone communicator to get to that older spirit generation. I mean, all this information came through that I wouldn't have known if I would have thought this is the only way you can do ancestral healing. I took a workshop, but I just stay open.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Open. And that's another point that you bring up, also taking workshops and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know if I should say this again, but here it goes. It's like you can have teachers, and the teachers tell you what they can do, but that doesn't mean that that's the way you need to do it.
Yeah.
You have to always adapt it to your life, your situation, your techniques, your talents, right? Don't just believe teachers. Don't just follow the leader, be independent.
I say, take what you need. When I do a workshop, I said, take what you need and leave the rest.
Exactly.
I'll
And
add, make it your own. I love that.
that's an important thing that people should remember. The second part is to practice this right brain intuitive thinking.
Yes.
So practice using your left hand.
Ooh, I love that.
Practice using your left hand. When someone speaks, practice trying to see what they're saying. Not just hear it, but see it. And that means you're listening, but you're not just listening to the words. You're letting yourself hear what's going on under the words, and then images come.
Yeah.
So listen, I mean, yeah, you know that too. So listen under the words, listen, and then hear, and practice trying to see it. Practice seeing how people are holding themselves, color, as we just talked about, shadows. Practice trying to see that. And when you have an idea about how something should be, especially that, when you feel like this isn't right, there's something wrong in my situation, try to see it. Try to see what that is. And then practice seeing images like in the clouds, in the carpet, practice trying to see images.
They are there. And spirits, do spirits get stuck in them? Because even like the cock or the pattern of my shower, I'm like, there's like a guy that goes, oh, and then I'll look in the wood grain and there's all these faces. I'm like, is that a face? How do they get in there? Rocks, faces are everywhere. I've never said this out loud. I just noticed them. I forgot to ask you about that.
Yeah. Well, actually, we have a special module in our brains to recognize faces. So we can recognize faces anywhere. If you look at a doorknob, it turns into a face if you look at it right. We've got a literal brain module to look at, to find faces. But this is one of the things we'll talk about next time, is if you practice seeing, then you can ask a question, and then you can allow yourself to see the answer.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. And that's one way of doing the divining for yourself, is to allow yourself to see.
Yeah.
So next time, now I've sort of described a little bit about how to do this way of doing the divining, but it isn't the normal way. Normal people don't do it this way. Some people can, some people do, but normally there are these other ways that people do. I mean, and I found like 6, 7 types of, they're not individual things so much, well, they're cases of it, but they're kind of almost types of ways, different types of ways, different kinds of approaches to divining. So next time we'll talk about these different approaches and what they have in common and how they're different, and the role of the supernatural and what that is. I want to talk a little bit next time about, as we talked last time and as we'll talk next time, what the supernatural, quote unquote, really is.
Ooh, that's a good topic. Yeah.
And so we'll talk about that next time. And then the time after that, we'll talk about the future, whether it's fixed, whether there's a fate, and so on, and the nature of time. We'll talk a little bit about that.
The age-old question, destiny. I love it. Perfect. Thank you so much.